Daniel Simon, of course, at Baton Rouge Community College. This week, I'm also going to do a little short review for you, of course, going for the second exam. Let's go ahead and start with China first, right here. So, around what major river did ancient China develop its early civilization? I talked about this before. The Yellow River, also known as the Wang Ho, which is one of the longest rivers in China, really Asia and China, which not quite as long as the Yangtze. But that's considered where China started a long time ago, especially during Paleolithic, Neolithic times. What geographic features helped to isolate China as a culture? There's a lot of different things that probably did that. I told you there's a lot of deserts in the west, in northern China, that kind of isolated them. Take Lamachan Desert, also the Gobi Desert, probably the most famous. To the west and south, you got the Himalayas, Tibetan Plateau, Kunlun Mountains, etc. Then to the east, you've got a lot of seas and oceans. You've got Yellow Sea, Sea of Japan if you want, also Pacific Ocean as well. What crops were mainly grown in ancient China? I mentioned that before, but rice and millet, really the two most famous. Rice, probably the oldest of the two. And rice, of course, is the main crop still grown in China today. It's the majority crop they grow the most. How did the Yellow River get its name? I told you it had something to do with the silt or sediment that's in it called less. These silt deposits kind of start in the western part of China and flow eastward and kind of gives the river kind of a yellowish, brownish color, kind of like the Mississippi River, kind of a muddy type river, which it is. What is the nickname of the Yellow River? Why is it called that? It's sometimes called China's Sorrow because it's been prone to flooding a lot, and they've had a lot of massive floods, which has killed a few million people overall. What are some inventions or technologies that the Chinese were famous for? Gunpowder, probably the most famous thing. Silk, crossbow, paper, like made from like wood, printing, like printing books and scrolls. Compass, of course, you've heard of also as well. What was the first major dynasty of China? Usually the one they talk about that's famous is the Shang dynasty, which sometimes called also Yin as well. Around what capital near the Yellow River did they develop around? They're talking about the Shang dynasty. It has different names, but the modern city is called Anyang, but the ancient name was called Yin, which is Y-I-N. And that's sometimes why they call it that name as well, besides Shang. What were oracle bones a first example of in China? They're first examples of early Chinese writing, where they wrote on bones and turtle shells, etc. What were they used for, oracle bones? Primarily for divination or telling the future, like prophecy, where maybe a ruler or somebody would, write something like, will I have an heir? Will we have a good crop season? And things like that. And so that's how the origin of early Chinese language systems developed before it kind of evolved through other dynasties later. What second dynasty conquered the Shang? That was the Zhou dynasty, which was one of the longest reigning in China. Both the Shang and Zhou had just kings, not emperors. What technologies, innovations were developed by the Zhou for warfare? They were famous for being one of the first to develop iron technology, like weapons and implements for like farming, I guess, and like iron swords. I know the crossbow is probably the most famous thing that was invented at that time. What was the feudal period of China under the Western Zhou? It was a period where China was ruled by a feudal hierarchy that went from like the kings and the lords down through vassals, and then they had a system of like different kinds of common people that they had, and the Chinese called it the Fingjin, was the Chinese name for it. What happened after the Zhou declined during the Eastern Zhou period? There was a period where China broke up into competing feudal states, and it led to the so-called period of the warring states that followed between the 5th and the 3rd centuries BC. And from there, you get Imperial China that emerges later. During what Chinese historical period did the 100 schools of thought begin? Mostly during the spring and autumn periods, when you start seeing all these different philosophies emerging, like Confucianism. What were examples of Chinese philosophies that were kind of created during this period? Confucianism, which is the most famous, Taoism as well, legalism kind of, they think, evolved from that period. I think I told you about the school of yin and yang kind of evolved from that period as well. Who was Confucius? Of course, known as Kung Fu Su, Master Kong. Confucius was a famous Chinese philosopher that they think lived close to about 500 BC. He was also a politician as well. He was the founder of Confucius, which is a type of philosophical system based on his teachings. What were some examples of some ideas he taught Confucius? Well, Confucius wanted to try and reform Chinese society, make it better. He also wanted to make government more reformed-wise, based on, civil service testing and things like that. He also wanted to create a better way of life for Chinese people. Of course, some ideas that he taught was the so-called 5 bonds or 5 Confucian relationships, which he wanted to develop to make Chinese society better. He also taught filial piety, which was the idea where people would have respect toward their elders, like the son having respect for the father, the subject having respect for the ruler, things like that. Ancestor veneration, he taught that too, which spread to other things like Hinduism and Buddhism. They have kind of the same thing. That's where you honor the dead. They sometimes call it ancestor worship, basically, where you honor the deceased ancestors and things like that. What is the Golden Rule? The Golden Rule was Confucius's most famous teaching. Do not impose on others what you do not wish for yourself. So it's considered his most famous thing. Treat others how you want to be treated, I guess, would be another way to maybe translate it that way if you want. What is Taoism? Who founded it? Taoism was a type of Chinese philosophical system founded by Lao Tzu, and it was a type of Chinese philosophical system where they sought people to live in nature in harmony with the universe. The so-called Tao or Tao, which means the way, and it incorporated, if you remember correctly, the yin and yang ideas, the whole dualistic universe where there's 2 opposites of each other. He wrote the famous work Art of the War, which I think was written around the same time. That was Sun Tzu. Remember, Sun Tzu was this Chinese general and military tactician that they think influenced a lot of military ideas in Asia and later in the West too, as well. What was the period of the warring states that occurred before the advent of the Imperial China? That was where basically at the end of the Zhou period, which was declining, China broke up into competing warring states where they fought for two and a half centuries between the 5th, 4th, and down to the 3rd century BC. And as you know, one state emerged to conquer them all, which was the Qin Kingdom or Qin Kingdom, and they formed the first imperial empire at that point. What kingdom and dynasty emerged to conquer all of China, 3rd century BC, kind of a repeat, but yeah, the Qin or the Qin kingdom, of course, did that. And they would, like I said, create Imperial China. I also said, remember, that's where the name China came from, was from that particular dynasty. Who is the first emperor of China? That was Qin Shi Huang, who was part of that Qin kingdom that, remember, unified China at that time at the end of the Warring States period. What was he famous for? He was famous for the fortification he built which he was the first to do, which was the Great Wall of China. He began constructing it originally. And of course, if you remember correctly, it was built mostly with using like rammed earth, like mud or earth, and not brick. Because the brick Great Wall we think of, like you see in that image on the left, was not built until the Ming Dynasty, like around the 6th century. Why did he build it? It was built to block barbarians that were invading China, related back to like the Mongols and the Huns. And the main foreign invaders they were trying to block initially were the Xiongnu. Now, they think we're kind of ancestors of the Mongols and the Huns. What is the nickname of the Great Wall of China? How was it built? Kind of already talked about that already, but the Chinese usually call it the 10,000 li long wall, which sometimes translates as meaning 5,000 kilometer wall. It has other names too, like Wall of Death, because they think that thousands of workers may have died building it and were buried in the wall. They've never really proven that before. Wall of Genghis Khan, I think, has been another term they use because the Ming built it to prevent the Mongols from invading China and all that. But by the time of the Manchu, about that, the Manchu broke through like around the 17th century, and it was obsolete after that. What capital did Qin Shi Huang build his massive tomb, his mausoleum? That was, of course, the city of Xi'an, sometimes called Xianyang as well. And then the later name they call it too is Chang'an, which is the name under the Tang Dynasty. What guarded? What was its nickname? That was the so-called Terracotta Army, which was a statue army of thousands of, I guess, of his what was supposed to be his army in the afterlife were supposed to protect his tomb. What dynasty conquered the Qin dynasty? That was the Han dynasty. They came in next. And the Han was, if you know about this, considered one of the most famous dynasties of imperial China, one of the longest, at around 400 years overall. Who was the founder? The founder was a commoner who took power after they overthrew the Qin, whose name was Liu Pang, or some pronounce it Liu Bang, and he later went by the name Han Geosu or Han Keosu, either one, and it meant something like the exalted emperor of Han, I think was the translation or one of the translations of what its name meant. Who is the greatest ruler of the Han dynasty? An emperor named Emperor Wu of Han, or Emperor Wu Di, he's called sometimes as well, who reigned between the 2nd and 1st centuries BC. It's one of the longest reigning. I think it was like 54 years or something like that. And he was very militaristic. That's kind of why it's called sometimes martial emperor. You might see sometimes because he was known for great expansionism in China because the Chinese began expanding eastward towards Korea, southward towards Vietnam, and then westward, of course, as well into the Gobi Desert as they pushed back the Xiongnu. What did Emperor Wu extend westward in the Gobi Desert? The Great Wall of China, which he did at the expense of the Xiongnu. He was one of the first emperors that was successful in defeating them in battle. What trade route ran westward from China starting under the Han? That was the Silk Road or Silk Route, which that's why they extended the Great Wall. And the Silk Road, of course, ran towards Asia, like India, Persia, and then, of course, toward the Roman Empire as well. What types of innovations, inventions were the Han known for in China? A bunch of them I talked about before. Paper and printing, that's probably their biggest thing they're kind of known for legacy-wise. Like wood block printing, I think, was one of the type of printing that they invented, the Han. Wheelbarrow, I think the iron plow by then, I think the compass, and I think I kind of mentioned like acupuncture, I think was something, I don't know if that's a big deal, that kind of invented about that time as well. I think seismograph too, I think was something that they may have invented around that time too. What are the two periods of the Han that are divided between the Zhen dynasty, which was ruled by that brief emperor named Wang Mang? They have the Western Han, sometimes called former Han, and then they had another one called the Eastern Han, called the later Han, and it was called that because of the fact they moved the capitals. The original capital was at Xi'an, where Chang'an will be, and then under the Eastern Han, it moved to Luoyang, which are sometimes used as a capital in China. What is the nickname of ancient China around the period of the Han? They sometimes call it the Golden Age of China, which goes from like the Han up to the Tang Dynasty. What was the Tang Dynasty famous for in China? When did it exist? The Tang Dynasty was the peak period, really, of the Golden Age of China. That's when a lot of art and literature in China peaked. I think Buddhism pretty much had spread all throughout China by that time. It was around from about 618 to 907 AD. So it kind of goes between the ancient and what we call medieval times around that period. Who were some famous Tang emperors that were well known? They had Gao Su of Tang, and he also had Tai Song. I think those two were considered like the founders of the Tang dynasty around the early 7th century. They also had the only female emperor of China as well, which was Empress Wu Zetian, or also called Wu Chao. I think it was called that way as well. We talked about her. And then they also had Xuanzong, I think was one more I talked about that was famous. He was one of their last great emperors who reigned, I think, in the next century, like in the 8th century. And he was the one they think that kind of built up Chang'an as its capital and named it the City of Perpetual Peace. What was the Grand Canal of China? By the Tang Dynasty, the Chinese had kind of almost finished the intercoastal canal system on the east coast of China, and the system of canals to connect the Yellow and the Yangtze rivers, but it also connected up to where Beijing will be, like when it's the capitals move there. And the canal system is about 1,100 miles in length. To give you an idea, it's of course important for their whole economy and trade. What are some later dynasties of China that ruled between the Middle and Modern Ages? I think the most ones you probably need to know, the Yuan dynasty. We'll get more into them. That's when the Mongols, seized control of China, Genghis Khan and Kublai Khan, etc. The Ming dynasty, you probably mentioned the most. The Ming dynasty was the main dynasty that took over China, ran the Mongols out, and they built the main brick Great Wall that we know today, the one that everybody likes to go visit. And then they were replaced later by the Qing or Great Qing dynasty in around the 17th century, who ruled till like 1912. And that was the last Chinese dynasty they had before the emperors stepped down. And after that, China was like a republic, pretty much. So that's basically the Chinese questions that I've got listed there. I'll go over also the ones on the Greeks as well, which is more extensive. I think there's like 15 questions on, I want to say on China, and I've forget how many I've got on Greece. Right now it's 25, 30 range, but I'm not sure if I'm going to add any more or not. But let me go through those real quick overall. So yeah, we first have the that period of the Aegean civilization or Greek Bronze Age that I kind of went over lecture-wise. Around what seeded mostly ancient Greece developed as one of the first European civilizations. That was the Aegean Sea. It's kind of the upper part of the Mediterranean between Turkey and Italy. What mythological figure is Europe named after? Europa. They believe was in mythology a Phoenician princess that was kidnapped by Zeus and brought to Crete. And after that, they have the beginning of the first, European civilization there, the Minoans. What is the historical name for early Greek history when the Minoans and Mycenaeans flourished? That would, of course, be the Aegean civilization, but they also call it the Greek Bronze Age as well, because most of these civilizations were in the Bronze Age and living throughout the Aegean basin overall. Who were the Minoans? Minoans were these pre-Greek maritime civilization that lived throughout the Aegean, and it was considered one of the first European civilizations that emerges at that time. They, of course, lived predominantly on the main island of Crete, is where they were, but they were kind of throughout the Aegean, like in the Cyclades. They traded between like Greece and Egypt and other parts of the Mediterranean Sea. Who was the archaeologist that discovered the Minoans? What palace did he excavate in the early 1900s? That's Sir Arthur Evans, a British archaeologist that came to Crete. And he was one that discovered it. And he found this palace that was there called Knossos, which was also like a kind of like a capital and city of the Minoans. And he began to excavate and rebuild it in the early 1900s. Who is the mythological king associated with the Minoans? The name that king that Arthur Evans names them after, that would be King Minos, who they're not sure was real or not, but it's mentioned by, of course, the ancient Greeks. What famous legend is associated with King Minos? That would, of course, be the famous Minotaur. Of course, that monster that was part bull, part man, that was killed by Theseus. Was the main Minoan language discovered by Arthur Evans? That would be Linear A, which was like a type of pre-Greek writing system that was mostly written on like clay tablets, and it's mostly undecipherable. I think about 80, 90 symbols were used with it. They think it's the first European language. That kind of influences others later, like Linear B, and probably was influenced with Greek as well. What types of artwork were the Minoans famous for in their palaces and their homes? Fresco paintings, like these lime plaster paintings that were put on their walls. And I think I told you the most famous one that survived from that time was the so-called bull leaping or bull jumping fresco found at Knossos. What caused the Minoans to decline? It was actually caused by cataclysmic events that happened in the Aegean. One of the main things that happened initially was the so-called Thera or Santorini volcanic eruption happened, which destroyed Akrotiri, which was one of their port cities in the Cyclades. They think it also destroyed Crete via tsunamis and I think earthquakes later. That enabled the Mycenaeans to come in and take them over. What myth or legend is possibly associated with their decline? Some believe that the Atlantis story told by Plato, the Greek philosopher, is kind of similar to that and might be where the story of Atlantis comes from. Who are the Mycenaeans? What did they develop in Greece? The Mycenaeans were a pre-Greek late Bronze Age civilization that developed in the mainland of Greece, like in the Peloponnese and other parts of southern Greece as well. They were a warlike people, as you see, like Iliad and the Trojan War. And they did have a language, which Sir Arthur Evans found too on Crete, which is called Linear B, which was a more complicated language that they think evolved from Linear A, but has been, they think, translated mostly. I think Linear B was an influence on later the Greek language that would develop, in the future. What types of cities were they famous for building? Which one was the most famous? The Mycenaeans mostly constructed fortified cities that were built on high points or hilltops, like an acropolis. And they were known for having kind of a palace complex, kind of like you saw on Crete as well. And they're later called Mycenaean because Mycenae, which is in the Peloponnese, like in the northern part of the Peloponnese, was the most powerful of the different cities. And so that's why they give it that name. Homer also calls them Achaean, but they're not sure what their name originally was. Who was the German archaeologist who did a lot of discoveries in Greece, like with the Mycenaeans? That would be Heinrich Schliemann, who they say later found or excavated what they think is Troy in Western Turkey. What was the Lion Gate? The Lion Gate was one of the main entrances to Mycenae. It's famous for its lions that are on top of the actual entrance when you come into it. And the Lion Gate and I guess the fortifications of Mycenae are very famous for their Cyclopean type masonry that I talked about. What tombs were discovered there at Schliemann? Schliemann mostly found the grave circles, like grave circles A and grave circle B, which were these cemeteries of Mycenaean nobility. But they also excavated at that site the so-called Tholos tombs, which were these beehive-shaped tombs that the Mycenaeans constructed, like the treasury of Atreus, which I guess is the most famous one that's well known. What epic poems were the Greek poet Homer famous for writing about? That would be like the Iliad, the Odyssey, which they think may have been written close to about maybe 9th century BC, maybe 400 years before Herodotus lived. What was the Trojan War? What was its main cause according to Homer? Of course, the Iliad is primarily, of course, about the Trojan War. The Trojan War was this mythological war, according to the Greeks, that was fought between the Greeks, which they think may have been the Mycenaeans or Achaeans, as they were called by Homer, and then they fought against the Trojans, who were based in Turkey, like this northwestern part of Turkey. According to Homer, the reason why the wars broke out was because of some quarrel among the Greek goddesses over which one was the prettiest or fairest. And so the gods asked Paris to decide, which goddess was the most fairest, so-called judgment of Paris. And he was given the apple of discord. And so he chose Aphrodite. And so Aphrodite made Helen of Troy fall in love with him. And so he basically took her to Troy and started the war. So all because of a woman, basically. How long did the Trojan War last? Around 20 years, they believe. Actually, I'm sorry about that. That's not correct. 10 years. 10 years, how long it lasts. But Homer says that if you read Homer or whatever, he only writes about it for like a short time period. So yeah, 10 years is actually what it is. Excuse me. Who are some major characters in the Iliad? I told you Agamemnon was one of the famous ones. He was the actual, king of Mycenae that led the Greek forces to attack Troy. Also, he had a brother named Menelaus. Menelaus was the one that went to Agamemnon to really start the war because, remember, they had taken his wife, Helen. He was the king of Sparta. And then I told you about Achilles, was the greatest hero, of course, of the Greeks, the best warrior. He was supposed to be the one that was kind of part god and was only vulnerable as Achilles. Well, he's called Achilles' heel, of course. Also, don't forget Odysseus as well. Odysseus, king of Ithaca, who's also later in the story of the Odyssey epic. He's the one that, that came up with the whole Trojan horse idea, which later they say led to why the Greeks beat the Trojans. On the other side, I guess major characters on Troy's side, you had King Priam, was the king that led the Trojan forces. He had two major sons I told you about. Of course, Paris, the younger, the one that started the war when he took Helen. And don't forget Hector. Hector, of course, the older son, was the one that was the best hero or warrior of theirs. He was later killed by Achilles, of course, in the story of the Trojan War, the Iliad. What Turkish site did Schliemann possibly discover ancient Troy? It's a site now called in Turkish Hisarlik, which means place of fortresses or fortifications. It's located close to the Strait of Dardanelles, where the Aegean is. And this site was used to build multiple fortifications and cities that went back maybe to Hittite times. And so Schliemann went there in the 1870s and excavated it. And so some people think that might be the site of Troy, but it's kind of controversial still. What artifacts were found by Schliemann in 1873 at this site? Priam's treasure, they pulled out of a wall there at Hisarlik, which was mostly gold artifacts. I told you they ended up in Germany, and now they're of course, in Russia now. And of course, we moved on after that. I kind of got into and talked about the rise of the Greek city-states next. What people invaded Greece during the Greek Dark Age that began around 1200 BC, or really the 12th century BC would be, it is. The so-called Dorian invasion comes in, where you get these different Greek peoples that emerge. And the proper name in Greek they're called is the Hellenes, if you remember that correct. Hellenes. And Hellenes were like Greek-speaking peoples of the Iron Age that settled there in Greece. Now, I told you they were descended from this ancestor of theirs who they think may have been a king in mythology, whose name was Hellen, but with two L's, Hellen. There are different tribes that they were related back to this king, Hellen. It says three, but I think there are actually four. They actually break up into eventually. The two main ones were the Dorians, which were the most famous that came down. The Spartans, are related back to all that. Ionians, as well, like Ionians are kind of where the, Athenians come in later. Aeolians, and then you had another tribe they call the Achaeans, not as well known, but that one was another one they had as well. What is the Greek name for the city-state that emerged around the 8th century when the Olympics began? That would be the so-called polis, which is what they call a city-state in Greece. Or if you want the plural version, poli, which I told you there's must be like 1,200 or more of them that settled throughout the Aegean basin. Athens was the most famous one and most populated. And then Sparta was the largest one. Those two were big rivals, of course, during that period. What two main historical periods make up the Hellenic Age? This is like the so-called main Greek age, of course, of the city-states between 776 to 323 BC. They have what they call Archaic or Old Greece, where it goes back to around the Olympics. They think that's when the city-states emerge. And it goes down to maybe close to 500. So really 8th to about the 6th centuries. And the classical Greece, which was the peak period of the city-states, was about 500 to 323 BC. That's where you got all those famous people living like Herodotus, Pericles, and so on. What were the Acropolis and the Agora in a Greek city-state? The Acropolis was kind of like this high point of the city where cities were built on top of. And it was like a public space area, which was used for like a fortification. You can see it was used for temples like the Parthenon to be built, etc. So it was a big public space there, which had a lot of different buildings that were constructed. They also had the Agora, or Agora, pronounced either way, I guess, which was like an assembly area where the citizens would gather for different things publicly. And so it was like a public square. They could sell goods, markets, baths, probably forms of entertainment and things like that as well. It's kind of comparable to the Roman Forum when we get to the Romans later. What types of government the Greeks developed? They had many different types. Traditionally, they originally had monarchies a long time ago, but they got rid of those. They did have tyrannies, like tyrannies or tyrants, where they have these aristocrats that run the state like dictators. Those aren't as popular, but the two most popular forms of government were oligarchy and then democracy. Oligarchy was a type of government where basically an upper class like nobility or aristocrats ran the state. I think I told you oligarchy meant ruled by a few, and then democracy was where all the male citizens would participate with running the state and the government. And democracy meant ruled by the people. And oligarchy was more popular with Athens. Excuse me, got that backwards. Oligarchy was more popular with Sparta, and in Athens, of course, had Athenian democracy. Oops. Anyway, now I'll get also into military stuff as well. Hoplites. I've talked about them. Hoplites, remember correctly, were these heavily armed infantry foot soldiers of the Greek militias or armies that they had. And they used these pretty much throughout the whole Hellenic age and even Hellenistic age down to the time of Alexander the Great. What battle formation did they use? Most hoplites fought in what they call a phalanx type battle formation, and they fought mostly with using hoplite spears, which is called a dory. What were types of weapons and armor used by hoplites? So besides the hoplite spear or dory, they had the short sword, which was usually called a xiphos, which they had different types. Of course, hoplon was one of the main things they used in the phalanx formation, which was those round wooden shields that they used to protect themselves in battle. They had different kinds of armor. They had cuirass armor, which was like torso body armor, which wrapped around you, mostly bronze. Linothorax was like a linen type of armor you wore. And they did some kind of like a layered armor, like a lamellar, like a scale armor. They had as well. Also, they had like greaves, which greaves were like leg armor that they had, and also talked about how they also had helmets, like the Corinthian style helmet was the most famous one they had. Also, I did have one more weapon I'll mention too that might be important later. Like the Macedonians did have like pikes they used, which were long spears used by infantry to repel like other infantry and cavalry. And that was usually used in larger sized phalanx formations where they have these long spears that are 18 feet long. Usually the Greeks called it a sarissa. What peninsulas did Sparta and Athens develop in Greece? Sparta developed on the Peloponnese Peninsula, which is like the southern part of Greece. And then above that, kind of to the east or northeast of Sparta, you had Attica, which is where Athens developed, the so-called Attica Peninsula. What was the name of the ancient region where Sparta developed in southern Greece? That would be called Lacedaemon, what they called it, which I told you was named after an ancient mythological king of Sparta. And Laconia is the modern name they call that area now. And I told you Sparta evolved from the wife of Lacedaemon, his queen was called Sparta, of course, the name. Who were the helots that the Spartans used to farm their land? Helots were like these Greek slaves that they were forced to grow everything because I told you that the Spartans really didn't work. They mostly just fought war in general. It has been debated about whether they're like slaves or serfs, but may have well been slaves because of the way they treated the helots, who heavily outnumbered the Spartans. Who was King Lycurgus? Lycurgus was one of the founding fathers of Sparta. He was a Spartan king they think that may have lived between the 9th or 8th centuries BC. He's known for developing a lot of their laws, their constitution, and also maybe their court systems and assemblies that they had. What was the Agog? The Agog was the Spartan military school where they trained Spartan boys to be soldiers in their armies. They usually trained Spartans from about the age of 7 to 20 before they would live in barracks together until like 30, which is a long time. I told you that the Spartans were usually in the army till like 60 years old. How was the political government of Sparta divided up within its oligarchy? I told you they had two kings, which were hereditary, and the kings mostly dealt with like military and helped run the state. They also had this thing called the Gerousia. The Gerousia was this Spartan consul that had 30 men on it, 28 elders and the two kings. They dealt with like Spartan issues, law, court systems, kind of like almost like a Supreme Court in a sense. The Apella was the Spartan assembly, where Spartan men, I think 30 and older, could participate. And then the Ephors also helped run the state. The ephors, which had 5, were these magistrates that took turns also advising and running the state as well. What was Athens famous for as a city-state? Who was it named for? Of course, named for Athena, right? We know of. Athens is this type of Greek city-state famous for its culture, arts, humanities, architecture, like with the Acropolis and the Parthenon, but also don't forget its naval power as well. They were known for having a naval maritime power throughout the Aegean and the Mediterranean Sea as well. Of course, named for the goddess Athena, of course, I'll talk about later as well. Who was Solon of Athens? Solon the Wise, he's called sometimes. He was a famous Athenian politician, statesman that was known for a lot of reforms to Athens. He's considered, by the way, a founding father of Athenian democracy. He was known for a lot of reforms. He reformed the economy, was one big thing he did, where he got the state to invest a lot more into exports like olive oil, etc. He also developed their social class system, which I told you had 4 classes in it. They think he also developed a lot of their assemblies, like the Council of 400, which was a bulle or a council where citizens were elected every year to run the state. Ecclesia was this also another assembly they had, which all male citizens could participate on later. He's also known for developing the Areopagus, which was a type of Athenian court system that met near the Acropolis. What type of ruler was Pisistratus? He was a tyrant, one of these Greek tyrants that ran Athens. And if you remember correctly, the tyrants were these aristocrats that took over a state, usually with backing from the lower classes. And they usually ran the state like a dictatorship, is what they did. And if you remember correctly, Pisistratus had 2 sons that also ruled, Hipparchus and also Hippias, that reigned down to about 510 BC before they were ousted. Who was Cleisthenes? Cleisthenes was an Athenian statesman who was known for employing a lot of democratic reforms. He's also considered to be a founding father of Athenian democracy. What reforms was he known for at Athens? He developed the Council of 500, which replaced the one that Solon had before, Council of 400. And he was also known for developing what they call ostracism, to oust people they thought were a threat to the state. All right, then we moved on to talk about, of course, the Greco-Persian Wars as well. What were the Greco-Persian Wars or Persian Wars? These were a series of wars fought against the Achaemenid Empire in the early 5th century BC, also called Persian Empire, First Persian Empire. What was the cause of the wars breaking out? They were caused by Persian expansion into the Mediterranean world, especially into Western Turkey. And it was also caused later by this revolt there too, which was called the Ionian Revolt, which I'll get to later. What was the Achaemenid Persian Empire? It was an Iranian empire which ruled parts of the Near East between the 6th and 4th centuries BC, over 200 years. And it was a huge empire which went from like India in the east all the way to Egypt and Turkey, and it was centralized in Iran a long time ago. What was the background and origins of the Persians? They were related back to Indo-Aryan peoples that came out of like close to where the Caucasus region is, where I think Georgia, Russia is today, Ukraine. And the people that settled in Iran later are known as Indo-Iranians, like the Medes and the Bactrians, and the Scythians and the Persians. They're all kind of related to each other. How large was this Persian Empire? It was maybe around 2 million square miles or larger, the largest empire in size at that point in history. And it was on 3 continents at one point too. Who was Cyrus the Great? Cyrus was the founder of the Achaemenid Empire. He also founded the dynasty as well. He ruled in the 6th century BC, and he conquered a majority of the empire from Iran, part of probably Afghanistan, Turkey, Iraq, and Syria. The other parts were conquered later, they think. Or the Persian kings Darius the Great and Xerxes the Great, famous for his rulers. Darius the Great expanded the empire further toward the Indus River. He also took the empire and he divided it up into 20 provinces, which were ruled by what they call a satrap, which were these viceroys of the Persian kings. He also built the royal road. He also founded Persepolis, which became their main capital later. He also standardized their coin system as well. And I'll get to it later. Both Darius and Xerxes the Great tried to invade Greece, but they failed. What was the Royal Road? The Royal Road was a Persian highway system that linked Iran with Iraq, and then it ran into all the way to Western Turkey. So it linked all those areas, main parts of the Persian Empire. And it was begun by, they believe, Darius the Great. And the total length of the actual highway system is almost 1,700 miles. I already talked, how did the Persians divide up their empire? They divided up into basically provinces, like 20 of them, and they were ruled by a satrap, which was like a royal governor handpicked by the Persian kings. I think usually the province was called a satrapy, which was named after the actual viceroy. What was Zoroastrianism? It was, of course, a Persian religion that was the main religion of multiple Persian states throughout that region. And the Persian Empire, that Zoroastrianism was really one of the first widespread religions throughout the world at the time. It was founded by Zoroaster, they think was an Iranian prophet and teacher, and they based the religion off of the god Ahura Mazda, which was a Persian god of creation and also wisdom. And the name supposedly meant wise lord in Persian. Also, let's get to it as well. Who is the main historian who wrote the Greco-Persian Wars? That was Herodotus, of course, who, father of history, is the oldest source, of course, on the Greco-Persian Wars. It's either called the Histories of Herodotus or History of the Persian Wars as well. What revolt in Western Turkey helped spark the first invasion of Greece by the Persians? That was the Ionian Revolt, where city-states like Miletus in Western Turkey revolted, and Athens supported it, and that's what pulled them into the war, of course, later. Which Persian king sent the first Persian invasion of Greece in 490 BC? That was Darius the Great, or Darius the First. That invasion would fail, but what was the Battle of Marathon? The Battle of Marathon was one of the first major battles of the Persian Wars, especially in that first invasion. And Marathon was a failed attempt by King Darius the Great to attack Attica and I guess, seize control of Athens. And the Persian forces were badly routed on the plain of Marathon. Who was Phidippides? Phidippides was this Greek herald or messenger that was sent to Athens after the Greeks won the Battle of Marathon. And it's a famous story told by Herodotus and also the Roman writer Lucian. Though it's kind of mythological, but that's where they get the marathon run idea, because he ran supposedly 26 miles to Athens to tell them they'd won. Who led the second invasion of Greece in 40 BC? That was, of course, Xerxes the Great. What strategy did the Greeks develop against the Persians when they formed a military alliance? Because of the fact that Xerxes was invading through northern Greece with a huge army, the Greeks decided to band together and send forces northward to block the invasion. So I told you they tried to block them at 2 points: Thermopylae Pass and the Strait of what they call Artemisium, using the Navy. What occurred at the Battle of Thermopylae? Thermopylae was this 3-day battle where a small Greek army of 7,000 hoplites tried to hold off a huge army of the Persians. Occurred in August 480 BC. And the Greek forces were led by the Spartan king Leonidas. He's very famous, who is killed in the battle, but they're able to slow the Persian forces down at that point. That led to a pivotal battle. What naval battle changed the course of the war and eventually led to the Greeks winning? That would be the Battle of Salamis that followed, where the Greek navy, with mostly Athens, with most of their ships, sinking a good chunk of Xerxes' navy. What was the Delian League that was set up by Athens and other states after the Persians were kicked out of Greece? Mainland Greece, anyway. The Delian League was a military alliance that was set up by Athens and involved a bunch of other city-states. And the idea to continue the war against Persia. That led to the War of the Delian League, they sometimes nickname it, where the Greeks tried to push the Persians out of the Aegean, which they were successful with. They took back Thrace. They took back a lot of the Aegean islands. They eventually would take control again of Western Turkey. And so it was kind of a turning point in the whole Greco-Persian Wars. What was the Athenian Empire that rose to prominence in the Golden Age of Athens? It was an Athenian-based empire that was found out of the Delian League. And over time, it took control of the Aegean. It was also a trading empire where, Athens and Attica traded throughout the Aegean. And of course, it made Sparta jealous later. And so it caused, the so-called Peloponnesian War. What was the Age of Pericles? It's sometimes a nickname for what they call the Golden Age of Athens, when Athens was dominant as a power in their empire. And it peaked under the rule of Pericles. Pericles was this Athenian statesman and general that was famous for a lot of reforms to Athens. They think Pericles was the most famous of the Greek politicians that they had. And what was he famous for? Well, he's famous for a lot of things. One thing, of course, we saw was that he was a big patron of the arts. They took a lot of money. They spent it lavishly to build up the state. They rebuilt the Acropolis. They built all those public buildings on the Acropolis, like the Parthenon. He spent money like helping out Phidias build stuff. What else? Art. They put it in art, playwrights, sculptors, things like that. He expanded democracy, and he also spent a lot of money trying to expand their naval power as well. What more caused the downfall of the Athenian Empire that emerged during the Age of Pericles? That was the Peloponnesian War, which is almost like a civil war that broke out in the Aegean Basin. And it pitted the Delian League, backed by Athens, versus the Peloponnesian League, backed by Sparta. So you got all these states like Thebes, that doesn't like them, and a few other states, Corinth and a few others that are there. And so Sparta ends up winning that war, and it breaks the back of their Athenian Empire. Athens is not as powerful later. What famous historian wrote the Peloponnesian War? That was Thucydides. Some people think is the father of what we call scientific history, if you want. Then we got that last lecture on the Greeks, which is Greek culture. What were the ancient Olympics? When did they supposedly begin? The ancient Olympics were one of the oldest, most famous Pan-Hellenic games that went back to 776 BC. Of course, they're famous for being held at the city-state of Olympia in the northwestern part of the Peloponnese Peninsula. They were held every 4 summers. And remember, the games were put on to honor the god Zeus. That was the whole point of it. It's more for religion than sports and all that. But what were some sports or athletic events associated with the Olympics? One of the most famous was the pentathlon, which they invented, which included running, discus throw, long jump, wrestling, javelin, just where a lot of those sports originate from. Chariot racing was also big, or horse racing, as well. Told you, pancration was like a blood sport cross between boxing and wrestling. Boxing, of course, too, as well. And I think I told you about hoplitodromus was another one that was kind of popular, which is a so-called hoplite race. Women had their own games. I don't know if that's a big deal, but they had games called the Heraean Games, which honored Hera. So, like I said, the games were segregated between men and women. Why were the Greek Olympics banned? They were banned because Christianity was becoming the religion throughout the Roman Empire. And so it was a plan to stamp out paganism, and promote Christianity. I told you the emperor that did that was Theodosius the Great around the year 393 CE, or AD if you want. When were the modern Olympics Games established? 1896. The first Olympic Games met at Athens, Greece. It'll be like the first summer games and all of that. And so that's when the first Olympic Games came in modern times. And then Winter Games were added a little later in the 20th century. Who are some examples of Greek playwrights and their plays? I told you there were only three main playwrights that wrote drama plays: Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides. They wrote tragedies. Aeschylus was known for the plays like Orestia, which was like a trilogy of plays based on the house of Atreus and what happens to Agamemnon and his family. They got Sophocles, who they consider to be the greatest of the dramatists, who wrote plays like Oedipus Rex, or Oedipus the King, which they think that's the most famous one ever done. Euripides had plays like Medea, that's well known. I told you, Euripides had the most plays that survived from ancient times. They had one more playwright, don't forget, of course, Aristophanes, but he didn't write really tragedies. He wrote comedies. He wrote comedy, satires. He had plays like Lysistrata, The Clouds, etc. And they remember Aristophanes to be really the father of comedy. Kind of starts it. He was considered the first great philosopher of Greece. I told you that was Socrates, who lived around the 5th century BC. He's really the first to have like a philosophical school in Greece. And he was known for his so-called dialectic method of teaching, which is sometimes called the Socratic method, which is a type of educational teaching method, or if you want to call it pedagogy, where he would use a questioning and answering format to bring out, I guess, argumentative ideas. What was Socrates' best known pupil or student? That would be Plato. Plato, of course, considered to be one of the greatest Greek philosophers, probably the most influential into Western philosophy, called sometimes, Platonic philosophy or Platonism, named after him. What school did he found in Athens? Plato is famous for founding the Academy, which the Academy was considered the first major school of higher learning where they taught every subject. And so it'd be kind of comparable to almost like a university today. So they taught anything from math, science, the arts, history, probably military science, whatever, I guess, whatever they had there. And Plato had various works he wrote. I guess the two I told you the most that were famous, really the most famous ones, Apology of Socrates, where, he has a lot of dialogues where he, talks about some of the things that Socrates said to his students. And the Republic is really his most famous work that survived from ancient times, which the Republic is kind of like a political treatise. Who was Plato's greatest student and a philosopher as well? That would be Aristotle, who was this Greek philosopher that came out of northern Greece, like around Macedonia. And Aristotle was known for a bunch of things. He had a couple schools that he founded, one in Macedonia, one in Athens that he had. The one in Athens was a rival school to the Academy. It was either called the Lyceum or Peripatetic School. And it was a school that taught everything too, like the academy, but it was kind of known for concentrating on some of the scientific fields, like natural sciences and so on. And I told you Aristotle was the one that kind of popularized ideas like the four elements, the ideas of the solar system, I think are kind of pushed at that time, like the geocentric model, which was wrong. And then Aristotle also was famous when he was in Macedonia. He taught Alexander the Great. He had a big influence on him, and I guess why he conquered later. Who were the Olympians or 12 Olympians that took over the earth according to Greek mythology? These were the chief gods of like related back to Zeus and his family that lived on Mount Olympus, according to the Greeks a long time ago. And the Greeks called them dodecathion, which meant the 12 gods. So they're kind of considered the most important ones. They had other gods, hundreds and hundreds of them that they had, but those ones that are considered the most important ones, and the ones that a lot of the Romans later kind of adopt as well. Yeah, the Olympians supposedly lived in mythology on Mount Olympus, which is located in northern Greece today, around 9,500 feet tall, which I think the Romans kind of don't believe that later, but some people thought Zeus and his family lived there. Who was their main leader along with his two powerful brothers that divided up the earth? Of course, Zeus was the chief god, kind of like the father of the gods. And he and his brothers and sisters had overthrown Kronos, one of those Titan gods, in that so-called War of the Titans or Titanmachy, and they took over the earth. And then what happened was, if you remember correctly, Poseidon got the oceans, and Hades, of course, got the underworld. Who are the 12 main Olympians, and what are they attributed to as gods of the Greek and Romans? Attributes, I guess, I want with that. I'll kind of go through the different gods. So Zeus, like I said, is called Jupiter by the Romans. Zeus, of course, is the most powerful chief god they have, often called the thunder maker, known for his thunderbolt. And Zeus is the one associated with, of course, Mount Olympus. So he's the one kind of rules over the world. And he's also kind of considered like, I think, god of thunder and lightning, sky, and also Lord Justice. Poseidon or Neptune rules the seas, of course, oceans, causes earthquakes, tsunamis, things like that. And Hades or Pluto, their other brother, of course, rules over the underworld. Poseidon's got a trident. Remember Hades, Pluto, of course. He's got that helm of darkness that he wears that covers his head and makes him invisible. Other gods, you've got Hestia or Vesta. I told you was like these were sisters of Zeus, Poseidon, Hades. Hestia, of course, was the goddess of the hearth when they kept that eternal flame. A lot of city-states were in Rome. Hera or Juno, of course, the sister and wife of Zeus. She's kind of like this mother goddess associated with motherhood, protector of, I guess, women with childbirth and things like that. And Hera's a very powerful goddess. They even have games that honor her, like the Heraean Games, of course, at Olympia. Demeter was another sister, of course, too. Ceres, she's, of course, the goddess of the harvest, dealing with grain crops. Then we got some other gods, of course, also here. Athena or Minerva, of course, these are the children of Zeus as well. And of course, remember her, Athena is the patron goddess of Athens. The name comes from. She's associated with things like wisdom, like knowledge, the arts, but also a goddess associated with war and peace. She often looks like a hoplite, of course, in images. Apollo, of course, Romans call him that too. Apollo, of course, son of Zeus, was a god associated with mostly sun and light, but also associated with things like music, poetry, prophecy, and truth as well. Artemis or Diana, of course, often associated with hunting, goddess of the hunt, one of those virgin goddesses, and a daughter of Zeus. I think I tell you, Apollo and Artemis are kind of like those ones are kind of like twins or something like that. Hermes or Mercury, so-called messenger god, he's often associated with things like money, luck, and fortune. Merchants tend to worship him along with people like also athletes and thieves as well. Because you know about Hermes, he's known for being fast, has wings on his helmet and wings on his feet. Aphrodite, or Venus, of course, the goddess of love, beauty, fertility, considered one of the greatest goddesses of the fairest of all. And of course, may have helped to cause the Trojan War. Of course, we've talked about before. Her lover is Ares or Mars, who's the god of war as well. Then Hephaestus or Vulcan, another god. He's of course associated, god of fire, metallurgy, and making of weapons and things like that. And Hephaestus or Vulcan was often known as the blacksmith of the gods. He made like weapons for the gods and things like that. Who was Dionysus or Bacchus? Remember I talked about him, a very important god in Greco-Roman culture, god associated with wine and winemaking, because wine is with everything, in the Greek-Roman world. Of course, a lot of temples they use wine in rituals. Also associated with fertility. Dionysus was often associated with a lot of festivals like the Dionysia or Bacchanalia, of course, at Athens or later Rome and all that. Who was Eros or Cupid? Eros or Cupid, of course, was the son of Aphrodite and Ares or Venus and Mars, and he was the god of erotic love. Later got connected with Valentine's Day, I think, in the future. But that's of course another god that's kind of not as famous as some of the other gods, but it's kind of well known overall. So yeah, here we go again. Of course, that announcement, of course, about that. I will be kind of posting, I don't know, probably around the weekend of probably coming up between week 10 and week 11. I'll kind of be posting this, review and all that. So there's the directions, of course, for it and the announcement right there. Remember, the exam is only on ancient China and ancient Greece. Does not, of course, include Alexander the Great and all that. But remember, don't forget, you can turn in the study guide, later. I think it's due by May, end semester. I think the study guide points for the second exam study guide need to be ancient China and up to like the time of Alexander the Great with the Greeks. So that's kind of what it'll be. I'm also going to be, like I said, into like I think week 11. I'm going to have a recorded lecture I'm going to work on, which will be on Alexander the Great. Which I told you I'm going to kind of do that for extra credit. It'll be like a bonus type quiz that'll be coming up. And so kind of help you get some extra points, of course, toward the semester. So that's it for today. Don't forget, like if you got a question, about the class, you can always email me. Don't forget, you got also Canvas discussions. If you want to ask me a question about the class or any of the lectures, do let me know about that. You can also leave comments and questions with the lectures on my YouTube channel as well. So that's it for this review, of course, for the second exam. So, good luck, of course, on it. If you have a question about it, whatever, do let me know.